The mission of the EBMT Patient Advocacy Committee is to ensure that the perspective, the voice of the patients and the caregivers are incorporated in the strategy and decision making at EBMT. We try to work with all the different committees and working parties within EBMT so we can provide the patient experience data and consider that as part of the factors that drive decisions on diagnosis, on treatments, on data collection, and so on. One of the tasks that the Patient Advocacy Committee has is to put in place the Patient, Family, and Donors Day. This is a full day dedicated to topics that are not necessarily included in a scientific program, but are relevant from the patient point of view. This year we had a session dedicated to cell therapy. We wanted to discuss how the future of cell therapy looks like. There are still issues with access to these therapies for the patients who need them the most. The barriers to access have many dimensions. Some can be logistics, some could be associated to timely referral to the therapy and other barriers. We are looking close to how we can work together with the clinicians and different stakeholders and ways to overcome those barriers. But beyond that, what we have today as clinical outcomes, as clinical results, are not necessarily the same that you see in clinical trials. In some areas you can do better, in some areas you have different results. We would like to move research into a direction where we can better identify the patients who would get more benefit from the therapy and differentiate from those for whom other therapies could be their first best choice. And not only that, quality of life needs to be properly assessed, constantly incorporated as part of the outcomes, and we are looking also close how we can advance data collection at registry level to incorporate patient-reported outcomes, for instance, and that's a very important movement because patient-reported outcomes can tell us how to ensure that the therapy is working well, not only from the disease treatment perspective, but also to make a better life for the patients. It's important to think that the address and the data that is going to be captured in the future, potentially, would be the data that we need to be incorporated for posterior use and regulatory purposes and reimbursement decision making, and not only with pharmacovigilance purposes. When we talk about BMT success and failures, this is a bit tricky sometimes. We consider success what gives you a good clinical outcome to control a disease or to cure a disease. But we need to see beyond that. We need to see quality of life, and we need to consider that what can be perceived from the clinical perspective as a success may not necessarily be perceived the same if the quality of life is not good. Same happens with failure. Sometimes the outcomes associated to bone marrow transplantation bring also undesired effects as graft versus host disease, for instance, which is a big bill for the patients to pay. And we were discussing all those things. We were discussing different perspectives, and also beyond that session, there were other sessions looking for bone marrow transplantation and how these kind of life-changing therapies can give you a new purpose for your life, for the patient's life, and how to address the psychological impact of living with such diseases or moving into receiving that therapy.